Welcome back to episode 12 of Recreating Star Wars with Universe Sandbox 2. This is Anton, and today we're going to be recreating Mandalore. This is where it's located in the galaxy, Star Wars galaxy, and this is what we're going to be remaking today using this beautiful game. Alright, let's start. So this is the star, and it has several planets. It actually has 9 planets orbiting around it, and the first planet is known as Nog, the Syrian rock that is known as Nog. So this is the planet that's relatively close to the star and is obviously not inhabited, doesn't really have much things going on it, except for, of course, for occasional mining that Mandalorians do on this planet. And the second planet that orbits Mandalore is known as Akan, which means war in Mandalorian language. And this planet doesn't have any atmosphere. It has 2 moons orbiting around it. You can kind of see them right there in the distance. And this planet is basically a barren world that Mandalorians sometimes use for training. But other than being very, very inhospitable and very scary looking, it really doesn't have much going for it. It's not even a mining colony. There's basically just nothing here. The third planet from the star is known as Tracen, and Tracen in Mandalorian means fire. For obvious reasons, this is a planet of fire. Now, this planet also has 4 moons orbiting around it, and if you look at one of the moons, it's smoking. It's smoking because it's actually still really hot in this region of space, and it's losing a lot of its atmosphere and possibly water as well because it's just being evaporated. Now, we don't really know the names of these moons, but I just randomly generated 4 of them, and this is them orbiting around this beautiful planet. And the fourth planet is known as Kalevala. This is a toxic desert planet that is surprisingly also known for its pacifist population. So people who don't like fighting, or Mandalorians who actually want to avoid fighting, usually are either from here or settle here. And the Duchess, who actually at some point becomes the leader of Mandalorians, or at least Mandalorians in the system, is actually from this planet as well. And I believe her name was Satine Kryze, or Kryze. And this person was the leader of this particular system sometime during the more recent events that we get to see in the Star Wars movies as well. And the fifth planet here is Mandalore. So this is a planet that's very, very Earth-like in its position around the star, and also its mass and its size, and of course its temperature. And essentially this is where Mandalorian culture was born, and this culture is very, very complex. There's actually quite a lot of books written about it in the Star Wars legends, and even in the Star Wars canon, there's quite a lot of Mandalorian stuff going on. And specifically here, we're obviously talking about the character of Boba Fett and Jango Fett, which are essentially Mandalorians. They're essentially the representative of this particular culture. This planet has 2 moons orbiting around it, and one of the moons, Concordia, is a sort of almost like an exile for certain people. So in more recent times in Star Wars, specifically in the movies, during the movie time, this moon of Concordia is used for exiling anyone who's too warlike, who actually wants to start a war, because Mandalorian culture actually, or Mandalorians living in the system, actually want to become more pacifist. But just in general, I just wanted to actually talk a little bit about the Mandalorians and possibly even teach you a little bit more about their culture, because it's actually very fascinating. So first of all, they originally stem from an extinct species called Tong, and these species used to live here, and they basically had this warlike culture, but at some point they became extinct, but their culture continued through the idea of Mandalorians, which basically became people of different races living together under the same kind of ideals. And they're essentially a group of warriors that often become mercenaries or bounty hunters. They're very warlike. They can also be hired to participate in any kind of a war, and they've actually participated in many different wars, but usually on the side of the Sith and not on the side of the Jedi. They also usually have only one leader, and this leader is called Mandalore. During the Star Wars trilogy, Mandalore was Boba Fett, and before that it was his father Jango Fett. But unfortunately, by the time of Star Wars trilogy, both Boba Fett and Jango Fett are basically just lonely representatives of their culture, because Mandalorians have been spread across the galaxy and they are no longer a united people. But what's really cool about their culture is that they're usually ranked as the best fighters in the galaxy, and the reason for that is because, well, normally it would be Jedi, right? But the thing is, on their planet, there is actually a really interesting iron called Mandalorian iron, also known as Beskar, which if you basically make your armor out of it, it will be impenetrable to any lightsaber. And this is essentially what they're famous for. So their armor is immune to lightsabers, and because of that, they're technically the best warriors in the galaxy. And they also have cutting-edge weaponry. They have really strict code of honor that they always follow. They always wear their Crusader armor that usually differs from soldier to soldier depending on your rank and your achievement. And as the best fighters, they usually thrive on battle, and basically this is their life, so they're truly the best warriors in the galaxy. Now, there's actually quite a lot of characters that appear throughout Star Wars that are Mandalorians, and the most famous ones are obviously Boba Fett, also his father Jango Fett, then of course Mandalore himself. Mandalore the First was essentially one of the more famous leaders, and he appears in one of the earlier stories and earlier lore from Star Wars. But there's actually another famous character from video games, and this particular character was known as Canderous Ordo, and Canderous Ordo was one of the companions that you got to play with during the Knights of the Old Republic game, and he actually helps the main character on his quest to reclaim his memories. And I don't want to spoil the game because we're actually going to be playing it together at some point, but essentially, yeah, that character was also Mandalorian, and at some point he, I believe, does become Mandalore the leader. But what's really interesting is how their culture actually got destroyed. So it was at the hands of Jedi Revan and Malak during the Mandalorian Wars that unfortunately Mandalorians lost. And when they lost the war, what Revan did was, first of all, he destroyed our culture, destroying armor and weaponry as well, but he also hid the mask of Mandalore, preventing the new leader from actually arising. So this is essentially why their culture was destroyed, because without the mask, they couldn't actually go through the ritual of starting or getting a new leader. And because of this, they had to evolve into a completely new culture of wandering mercenaries and conquerors rather than warriors living on this particular planet. Anyway, well, let's keep going. There's actually more planets for us to create, and we're gonna continue talking about their culture as we're creating more planets. Planet number 6 is called Mandalia, and Mandalia is famous for a species called Mandalian giants, which are actually really powerful warriors as well. And this particular planet has one moon orbiting around it. You can see it right there in the distance. Then after Mandalia, we're going to have 2 gas giants similar to our solar system. There's going to be 2 gas giants here, and the first gas giant is known as Bonagal, and Bonagal is a gas giant quite similar to Saturn, and it has at least 34 different moons orbiting around it. You can kind of see them in the distance, and essentially that's all we know about it. We know that some of its moons are obviously used for mining, and we also know that it is a gas giant that is relatively large in size compared to other gas giants, but nothing else is known about it. And the second gas giant that has 30 moons around it is known as Shukut, and Shukut means crush. Now, why it means crush, or why this giant is named as crush, is not really known, but you can only speculate that something must have happened and someone got crushed on this particular gas giant, or maybe that's how it actually interacts with other planets in this solar system. And the last 9th planet in this system is known as Werda. Werda means darkness, and because this planet is really far away from everything, it's really cold, and it's really dark. You can kind of see the rest of the solar system right there, but Werda is far, it's cold, and there's really nothing going on this planet as well. And before we finish this video, I just briefly wanted to talk about Jango Fett, who was technically one of the best Mandalorians who have ever lived and who will ever live. And during, or actually way after all of the Mandalorian Wars, when their culture was already sort of destroyed, Jango was one of the few survivors not being captured by the Jedi that were actually looking for Mandalorians, trying to punish them and trying to imprison them. And although the Jedi Council tried to lay a trap for Jango Fett, he not only avoided the trap, but he actually single-handedly managed to slay half of the members of the Jedi Council, which is actually very impressive. Because he slayed those members, this is when Count Dooku decided to leave the council and then essentially joined the Sith. And because he was able to escape and was known for his prowess, he was chosen by the species called Tyrannus as essentially the genetic source for the clone army being created on the planet called Kamino, which was a hidden planet we get to discover in Episode 2 of Star Wars. And it's also speculated that the so-called Republic Commando Order 66, which was responsible for killing so many Jedi in Episode 3, was also motivated by Jango Fett's hatred of the Jedi, and because a lot of these soldiers were actually his genetic clones, they were so successful at actually killing so many Jedi at the same time. But one of the reasons he actually agreed to basically being cloned and creating this army is because his goal was to eventually create the so-called Mandalorian army, to recreate Mandalorian glory, and the Tyrannus gave him this opportunity through the creation of the so-called clones, which of course later became the Stormtroopers. And the clone trooper armor is essentially based on the Mandalorian gear. So all together, this is actually all connected. So the Mandalorians essentially influenced the look behind the Stormtrooper armor, and obviously a lot of the Stormtrooper ideology is based on Mandalorians as well. And something like 23 years after the Battle of Yavin, his son Boba Fett became the Mandalore, became the great leader, but as we know, he actually does die a horrible death, being digested for thousands of years in the pit of Sarlacc, and so this unfortunately happens to the greatest leader of the Mandalorian people. But even today, they still exist. There's quite a lot of Mandalorians in the Star Wars galaxy, and quite a lot of smaller communities scattered around the galaxy. But most of them actually are still located in this particular solar system, and essentially this is what their culture is all about. Anyway, I hope you learned something new today, and I hope you enjoyed this video where we recreated the Mandalorian system of Rao, the star known as Rao, and we talked a little bit about their culture and their ideology. Thank you so much for watching. Check out some of the other videos I made about Star Wars universe using Universe Sandbox 2, and also don't forget to subscribe, share this video with people you think may like Star Wars videos, and also like this video if you've enjoyed watching it. Thank you for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video, and as always, game you later, and bye bye.